The anime begins with the protagonist completely disoriented, trying to understand where he was and mentally complaining about who might have turned off the light around him. Little by little, a small luminous crack appears before him, growing stronger and stronger until it allows him to see the surroundings more clearly. Thus, he realizes that he is in the middle of a forest. Without understanding how he ended up there, a status window appears in front of him, informing him that he is about to be born from a dragon egg. Soon after, a voice starts speaking to him, introducing itself as the divine voice of level 1. Confused by all of this, the protagonist tries to find out who he is talking to. But the entity replies that, since it is still only at level 1, it cannot reveal more information. Since he cannot stay still, the egg ends up falling from the top of a tree. The protagonist panics when he notices that his HP has decreased due to the fall. The divine voice then informs him that he has just acquired a new title, called Clumsy. Next, the egg begins to roll down a slope and only stops at the edge of a lake. At that moment, he manages to see his own reflection in the water and falls into despair upon confirming that he really has turned into an egg. The divine voice warns him that he still belongs to rank F and can easily die if his shell is broken, despite having the potential to become an extremely powerful dragon over time. In that state, he is seen only as food. Dragon eggs are considered a delicacy, and many adventurers often hunt them to eat. The situation is even more dangerous because he is not in a nest, protected by his parents. The protagonist tries to process all this information when, suddenly, he starts rolling downhill once again. As a result, his roll skill increases to level 2, allowing him to have some control over his direction while moving. When he finally stops, he realizes that only 3 HP points remain. Fearing that he might die at any moment, he decides to remain still until nightfall. During the rest, his HP is completely restored. After that, he decides to move forward, rolling through the forest. As he moves along, he begins to wonder whether he will one day truly become a powerful dragon. Imagining if he needs to grow stronger in the same way as in RPG games. Further ahead, he encounters a strange creature. By using analysis, he discovers that it is a dark worm, a monster that feeds on eggs. As soon as the creature notices him, it starts chasing him. The protagonist tries to flee as fast as possible, which in this case means rolling at full speed. He then considers the possibility of fighting, but realizes that the worm has more HP than he does. Facing it directly would be practically suicide, since the risk of being devoured is enormous. Thinking calmly, the protagonist devises a plan. He lures the monster to the edge of a cliff and, at the right moment, causes the worm to fall, defeating it without the need for brute force. To him, this proves that a good strategy can be more effective than pure power. After the victory, the divine voice informs him that he has received 12 experience points. In addition, thanks to the title Walking Egg, he gains 12 extra points. The protagonist finds it curious to realize that he is truly accumulating experience like in a game. The voice continues, explaining that he has now reached level 5, the maximum level possible for an egg, with all conditions met. The system presents 2 evolution options, hatchling dragon and small dragon. The small dragon is a dwarf race among dragons, but even so, when fully grown, its size surpasses that of a bear. It is feared by adventurers due to its powerful fire breath. The hatchling dragon, on the other hand, is not suitable for combat, as it has short claws and fangs. Its meat, however, is extremely tender and highly appreciated when prepared with sauce. Despite these disadvantages, this form has enormous evolutionary potential, being able to transform into various dragon species in the future. Even so, the hatchling dragon is constantly hunted by both adventurers and other monsters. While the protagonist considers that the small dragon seems to be the safer choice, a mysterious hand appears and envelops him, wishing for him to grow strong and stating that its goal is to reach the top. The presence also asks him not to disappoint its expectations. At that moment, the divine voice evolves to level 2. The protagonist believes that those hands belong to the divine voice itself, and that they only appeared now because he reached this new level. He reflects once again on which path to follow. It was said that the hatchling dragon has much greater evolutionary potential, which indicates that the small dragon might not evolve as much, or might not evolve any further at all. For that reason, even aware of the risks and disadvantages, he decides to choose the hatchling dragon. With the evolution completed, thanks to the level 1 title, Son of the Dragon King, all of his resistance skills that were at level 5 or below are enhanced. In this new form, he learns several skills, such as Dragon Scales, Baby Breath, Whistle, and Bite. However, he notices that his HP does not fully recover simply from evolving. Approaching the body of the defeated Dark Worm, he mentally expresses his gratitude, acknowledging that he only managed to evolve because of that creature. At that moment, something strange happens. Just by looking at the monster, he feels an intense hunger. Even though he finds the idea unpleasant, his draconic instincts tell him that he needs to feed. The divine voice confirms that eating is necessary to recover. Reluctant but with no alternative, the protagonist begins to devour the dark worm, feeling disgust throughout the entire process. After a night of deep sleep, he awakens completely recovered. Still without understanding how, he concludes that he reincarnated into a world that closely resembles an RPG game. Even so, his mind remains confused, as he cannot remember who he was before arriving there. He is almost certain that he was human, although he does not even know what his gender was. Suddenly, several dark worms appear around him. This time, however, he decides to face them. Hunting them one by one, he gains experience, improves his mastery of Dragon Breath, and quickly rises to level 7, which unlocks the Dragon Punch skill. When he finishes defeating all the enemies, he realizes that he has already reached level 15. Faced with this, the protagonist begins to believe that reaching the top of this world might be easier than he had imagined. At that moment, the protagonist's stomach starts rumbling again, making it clear that he is hungry once more. He feels frustrated at the thought that he might have to eat worms again. Looking around more carefully, he notices some mushrooms growing nearby and decides to take a risk, choosing to eat them instead of insects. After the improvised meal, he drinks some water and comes to the conclusion that he should never again consume mushrooms found randomly in the forest, as that choice almost cost him his life. Despite the danger, this experience ends up granting him a new skill, poison resistance. Continuing on his path through the forest, he begins to reflect that he needs to find different prey, as he does not want to spend the rest of his life feeding only on insects. It does not take long before he spots a gray wolf ahead. As soon as the animal enters his field of vision, the protagonist begins to chase it. Shortly after, he manages to defeat the wolf using Dragon Punch. Unlike previous times, he decides to use his flames to prepare the meat, making a kind of grilled dish. Upon tasting it, he realizes that the flavor is much better than that of the dark worms, which leaves him quite satisfied. Later, he faces and defeats another gray wolf, causing his level to increase to 20. Soon after, he is informed that his next evolution will only occur upon reaching level 25. Even though he is relatively close to that goal, he notices that leveling up is becoming increasingly difficult. Suddenly, strange sounds catch his attention. He begins to hear voices, although he cannot understand what is being said. Even so, he recognizes that they are human voices. Approaching cautiously, he notices that these people are wearing armor, which confirms to him that this truly is a fantasy world. By analyzing the group's statistics, he notes that none of them surpass him. Even though he is not human, he tries to approach them with the intention of making friends, but ends up being attacked by an adventurer without any warning. The protagonist cannot understand the reason for the attack, as he showed no hostility and posed no danger to them. Shortly afterward, he is struck by a spell cast by the adventurers. As a result, he ends up acquiring the magic resistance skill. Trying to escape, he realizes that his body is extremely weakened. As the adventurers draw closer, he concludes that he was naive to believe that humans and dragons could coexist peacefully. Even so, he tries to flee with all his strength, as he does not want to die so soon after reincarnating in that world. However, his weak body barely responds. At the moment when one of the adventurers prepares to deliver the final blow, a girl steps in front of him, stopping the attack. Although the protagonist still cannot understand the words exchanged between them, he clearly perceives that the girl is trying to protect him. She approaches and begins to cast healing magic on him. The protagonist is moved when he realizes that, even though he is of a different race, she is making an effort to save him. By observing the statistics, he discovers that her name is Myria Melania. Even with her MP nearly depleted, she continues to spend energy to heal him. Gradually, he begins to understand what she is saying, realizing that the paralysis affecting him is almost gone. At that moment, he acquires the Greek language skill. Suddenly, an extremely oppressive presence fills the surroundings. He hears screams coming from the direction where the other adventurers were. The protagonist understands that there must be a very powerful monster nearby and believes that those humans have probably already been defeated. Myria tries to run to help her companions, but the protagonist attempts to stop her, as he knows she would have no chance against something so strong. Even so, the girl says goodbye and runs toward the danger. Determined to help her friends, he tries to follow her, but his body is still partially paralyzed. As soon as he regains his movement, he runs in the direction of the screams. Upon arriving at the location, he is confronted by a small stone dragon, rank C, level 197. His eyes immediately turn to Myria, who is lying unconscious on the ground. He feels the urge to help her, but ends up frozen in fear as he faces that imposing creature. The stone dragon tries to bite him, but the protagonist manages to escape by a narrow margin. In that instant, he understands that he made a grave mistake. A deep sense of regret arises for not having joined Myria's group, as he believes that if the four of them had fought together, they might have had some chance against that creature. Now, completely alone, he is not sure if he will even manage to leave that place alive, let alone defeat the rock dragon. Hidden among the bushes, he looks around and notices Myria lying on the ground, unconscious, with only 6 hit points remaining. Even in the face of the critical situation, he feels a slight sense of relief upon realizing that she is still breathing. Unable to locate the protagonist, the rock dragon shifts its focus and begins to approach Myria. Seeing this, the protagonist starts questioning what his next action should be. If he did nothing, she would likely be devoured by the monster. However, before he can act, a divine voice echoes in his mind, interrupting his thoughts. The voice orders him to flee immediately, warning that if he remains there, he will end up dying. Even so, he remembers that Myria had reached out to help him before, and decides that he could not simply abandon her. Firm in his decision, he lets out a loud roar to draw the creature's attention and charges straight at it. The dragon tries to crush him with a violent stomp, but he manages to evade it, and the system recognizes his feat, granting him the title of King of Evasion. Observing the battlefield, he realizes that the old man from Myria's group has his HP reduced to 0. When checking the other companion, he notices that he still shows signs of life. Desperate, the protagonist tries to think of any way to save Myria and the survivor. He begins to provoke the rock dragon, striking it repeatedly to make it chase him. However, this decision ends up proving to be a mistake, as the monster uses an earth-based ability that hits him directly. As the dragon draws closer, the protagonist realizes that the enemy is about to use a biting attack. Anticipating the move, he reacts strategically and counterattacks with the so-called dragon punch. Even so, the creature somehow survives and immediately enters a recovery state to restore its HP. Taking advantage of this brief opening, the protagonist runs to Myria, places her on his back, and flees the area, leaving the other member of the group behind, as he has neither the time nor the strength to save anyone else. After moving away from the battlefield, he realizes that Myria's HP continues to decrease, which makes him think this may be happening due to blood loss. Trying to help her, he makes an effort to use healing magic, but he is unable to activate that type of spell. At that moment, he senses a faint smell of humans in the air and decides to follow that direction, believing that only people would be capable of saving Myria's life. Guided by this weak trail, he moves forward through the forest. However, along the way, a horde of gray wolves begins to pursue him. Even exhausted, the protagonist faces the beasts with everything he has to protect Myria. At the end of the confrontation, he is completely out of energy, but even so, he forces himself to keep walking. Carrying Myria, he continues on until he finally reaches a village. Seeing no one around, he lets out a loud roar, hoping to draw attention. Several humans appear in response, but upon seeing the scene, they immediately conclude that the protagonist is a beast trying to harm Myria. With no way to communicate between them, the humans begin to attack him. Realizing that there was no way for a dragon to make them believe he was not a threat, he carefully places Myria on the ground and flees from there. The system then grants him a new title, called Little Hero. A few days later, Myria awakens after receiving proper treatment and finds herself inside Marielle's house. The elf explains that she had to use powerful white magic to save her life. She comments that, by all indications, Myria has already recovered from most of her injuries and asks the girl to rest a little longer. Myria agrees, but begins to wonder silently who had brought her back to the village. Marielle shows irritation as she comments that she had warned Dawes several times not to get into trouble. Myria asks where Mr. Dawes and Mr. Grants are. With a heavy expression, Marielle reveals that Grants is dead, as his body was found by the villagers in the forest the day before. Visibly shaken, she calls Dawes a fool for having faced a stone dragon. When Myria asks about Dawes' whereabouts, Marielle replies that his body has not yet been located, but she believes he was devoured. Upon realizing that she was the only survivor, Myria is overcome by an intense feeling of guilt and begins to regret not having stopped Dawes from challenging the stone dragon. Tears begin to fall, and Marielle consoles her, stating that it was not her fault. Myria remembers that Dawes was a great inspiration to the children of the village, always hunting the monsters that approached the area. She also recalls the day she saw him arguing with another man at the bar. The argument began when the man claimed that Dawes would never be able to defeat a stone dragon. He spoke with such conviction because he knew that, in a previous encounter with that type of monster, Dawes had felt fear and retreated. Even so, Dawes insisted that that was part of the past and declared that if he had a reason to fight a stone dragon at that moment, he would certainly win. The men present at the bar were certain that he would not succeed. Pride ended up pushing Dawes to try to prove otherwise, and that was how he decided to face a stone dragon. As a result, he sought out Myria to accompany him. Upon hearing what the mission would be, she questioned why he had not asked Marielle to go along. Since her healing magic was far more advanced, Dawes replied that he had spoken with Marielle, but that she was busy at that moment and, because of that, recommended that Myria accompany them. The girl reminded him that the stone dragon was the strongest monster in that region and that Marielle had made it clear that, under no circumstances, should they face one. Dawes asked if she was doubting him and stated that Grants had been present when Marielle gave permission. Grants, in an embarrassed manner, confirmed that this was true. He further added that Myria knew how dangerous stone dragons were, and that, if it were not with them, one of the two might end up dying. Reluctantly, she agreed to accompany them, imposing the condition that if the situation became too dangerous, they would retreat immediately. After hearing the whole story, Marielle states that it was Dawes' pride that led him to his death and reinforces that Myria bears no guilt whatsoever. She advises her to be careful not to make the same mistake in the future and comments that it is impressive that the girl managed to survive even with such severe injuries. Myria then says that someone carried her to the village. Confused, Marielle asks what she is talking about, explaining that Myria was found being attacked by a monster in the surroundings of the village. Myria states that she lost consciousness during the stone dragon's attack and that there was no way she could have returned on her own. Marielle replies that no one from the village would risk walking through the forest at night and reaffirms that Myria was found being attacked by a monster, which Gregory managed to drive away to save her. She explains that humans can lose part of their memory after suffering a very strong shock, and that this was probably happening to her. Even so, Myria has a vague memory of the protagonist fighting to protect her. Because of that, she asks Marielle to describe the monster that was attacking her at that moment. Marielle replies that the creature had already fled when she arrived at the scene. With that, Myria begins to question internally whether it had been that dragon who saved her. The next morning, the protagonist awakens after a prolonged rest. As soon as he opens his eyes, he realizes that all his injuries have disappeared. He knows that rest accelerates his recovery. But even so, he finds it hard to believe that so many wounds were healed in such a short time. His thoughts soon turn to Myria, and he wonders whether she would also already be out of danger. In silence, he recalls everything that happened over the last few days. Even though he had evolved and believed he had become stronger, the feeling of helplessness before the stone dragon still remains vivid. This memory leads him to a clear conclusion. He needs to become much stronger. The scene then shifts to the protagonist facing several shadow worms. During the fight, he comments that he tied one of them to a tree, using the trapped worm as bait to attract the others. Thanks to this strategy, he ends up receiving the title of offender from the system. He feels no pride whatsoever in this method and decides that he will not use it again after this. Even so, he acknowledges that, at that moment, he needed experience to reach the next stage of evolution. Continuing to hunt and fight, he accumulates experience until he finally reaches level 25, at which point he becomes eligible to evolve. The divine voice then asks whether he wishes to view the evolution tree, and he responds positively. This time, 5 options appear before him: young plague dragon, infant marble dragon, dragonling, mini angel dragon, and mini dragon. As he looks at the options, he wonders what the difference is between mini dragon, small dragon, and baby dragon. The divine voice explains that the term small does not refer to an evolutionary stage, but rather to the size limitations of a given species. Species classified as small have faster attribute growth, but have fewer evolutionary paths and fewer abilities when compared to baby-type species. Even so, many of their future evolutions carry high potential. Next, the voice explains that mini-types have even fewer evolution options, but have the advantage of a more stable evolutionary tree. Even with the explanation, the protagonist remains confused and realizes that he cannot make a decision without better understanding each choice. Faced with this, the divine voice begins to detail the options. First, it explains about the mini dragon, which has the same reduced size as the small dragon. However, its individual growth is slow and its evolutionary options are limited. In compensation, several of its future evolutions present great potential. This description does not please him, as he does not like the idea of slow growth nor restricted evolutionary paths. The next option is the mini angel dragon, a dragon that awakened the so-called protective spirit and swore to live for the sake of others. As a consequence, it can use white magic, but its direct combat capability is low. This limitation bothers him, as he does not like the idea of not having adequate abilities to fight. He even thinks about white magic, remembering Myria and how she used it. But that is not enough to convince him to choose this form. The divine voice then goes on to explain about the dragonling. This is the natural form that comes after the baby dragon stage. Although it is not yet fully mature, its physical capabilities have increased significantly compared to the previous form. Soon after, the infant marble dragon is presented, a form that went through a mutation. This evolution grants the dragon magical capacity superior to that of a common dragon. Finally, the divine voice speaks about the young plague dragon. This form represents the first stage of a malevolent dragon, known for spreading disasters wherever it goes. Even so, the voice emphasizes that he has not completely strayed from the correct path and that it would still be possible to return. The idea of causing destruction does not please the protagonist at all, and for that reason he rejects this option without hesitation. The system continues describing the characteristics of this type of dragon, mentioning, among other things, that it possesses high intelligence and the ability to use human transformation. The protagonist reacts immediately, stating out loud that he does not wish to become malevolent. However, upon reflecting more carefully on what he has just heard, he ends up becoming especially interested in the possibility of transforming into a human. Even knowing that becoming an evil dragon seemed like a terrible choice, he decides that he needs the human transformation ability no matter the cost. Because of that, he ends up choosing to evolve into a young plague dragon. As soon as he observes his new form, he begins to doubt whether he truly made the right choice, since his appearance is now extremely intimidating. With the evolution, the ability to view statistics increased to level 3, allowing him to analyze his own abilities in greater depth. The so-called divine voice also evolved from level 2 to level 3. In addition, he acquired the ability to fly, several skills typical of an evil dragon, and also received the title of Calamity. None of this pleases him. He wonders where the long-desired human transformation ability is and, realizing that it does not appear anywhere, begins to think that perhaps it is necessary to gain more levels to unlock it. However, the divine voice explains that, being only at level 3, it is not capable of providing that kind of information. Overcome by despair, he throws himself to the ground. Instead of human transformation, he ended up receiving only strange and dangerous abilities, precisely the opposite of what he had expected. He had only chosen the path of the young plague dragon because he believed it would lead him to the ability he wanted so much. Trying to set this aside for a moment, his curiosity turns to the identity of the divine voice that speaks to him. But since it also cannot provide that kind of information, he asks at least for examples of the new abilities he has just acquired. The voice begins by explaining the ability called Dragon Scale Dust. By beating its wings, the dragon spreads a miasma that affects everything around it. At maximum level, this ability is so destructive that a dragon could decimate entire nations simply by flying over them. He decides to test it and realizes that a simple flower withers and dies upon feeling the effect of the miasma released by the movement of his wings. This deeply unsettles him, as he begins to see himself as a kind of biological weapon. Humans would never approach a dragon like that. Next, the divine voice describes another ability, Diseased Breath. It is a breath-based attack that releases a miasma laden with diseases. In addition to causing severe negative effects, this ability is highly contagious and has already been responsible for the extinction of an entire nation. Hearing all this, he begins to wonder if there is still any chance to return to a more proper path. At that moment, he remembers the titles, since they exert great influence over future evolutions. The voice explains that, thanks to the small hero title, earned through his actions in saving Myria, he can still follow a heroic path. However, the title of Calamity points in the opposite direction, potentially leading him to become a demon lord. Completely shaken, he begins to thrash on the ground, stating that he made the wrong decision and wishing to return to his baby form. When he was still innocent and free from this kind of choice, the scene then shifts to Marielle and Myria. The elf is recharging the village's protection stones, artifacts that create a kind of barrier meant to ward off common monsters. However, these barriers do not work against persistent creatures or those that have a very clear objective. Marielle carefully analyzes each stone, worried about the possibility that the monster that attacked Myria might return if any of them are damaged. After finishing the inspection, Myria asks if Marielle can tell her more about monsters. She cannot shake the strange feeling that she was saved by that monstrous dragon. Marielle looks at her and asks whether, by any chance, Myria might be starting to develop feelings for a monster. Myria immediately denies it, although deep down she is not entirely certain. Setting that aside, Marielle begins to explain that monsters can evolve into different forms. With each evolution, they become stronger, and this process depends on hunting other creatures to gain levels. Myria comments that, in a way, humans also need to hunt monsters to gain experience, level up, and improve their abilities. Marielle agrees, but adds that, in the case of monsters, each species has a maximum level limit. Upon reaching this limit, the monster evolves into a superior form. This cycle repeats, allowing them to assume increasingly powerful appearances over time. Myria finds it hard to believe that people in the past managed to understand the nature of each monster so well. Marielle explains that this did not always happen through simple observation. From time to time, special people appear who are able to hear a divine voice, which shares information about monsters, levels, and various other aspects of the world. Normally, these people end up becoming heroes or saints. Monsters constantly fight to survive, gain experience, and evolve. Because of this, every monster seeks power and becomes increasingly ferocious. Even if that dragon saved Myria's life, the next time they meet, it will have already evolved into something far more threatening, and its fangs will be turned against her. Myria shouts, asking Marielle to stop. The elf responds firmly, saying that Myria should not create any kind of strange expectations toward monsters, as they are not compatible with humans. The scene returns to the protagonist, who is now determined to level up as quickly as possible in order to return to the path he considers correct. In his thoughts, he reinforces that he wants to become a hero, not a demon lord. However, for now, his greatest desire is to learn human transformation, since he wants to reunite with Myria. With this in mind, he begins searching for weaker monsters in the surrounding area. Suddenly, he feels his body grow heavy and realizes that he is having difficulty moving. When he understands the situation, he sees that he has ended up trapped in a spider web. Upon analyzing the creature's stats, he notices that the spider is stronger than he is. The spider tries to wrap him even more with its webs, but the protagonist reacts by using his breath attack. Without realizing it, the webs around his body begin to catch fire. Thanks to this unexpected event, he ends up acquiring the fire resistance skill. When checking the spider's condition, he realizes that the attack caused little damage to its HP, but applied the negative burn effect. Taking advantage of this, he launches an attack and strikes the creature with his poisonous claws. With this blow, the spider's HP drops to half and the paralysis effect is applied. Even so, the creature goes into a frenzy. Faced with this, the protagonist decides to retreat. However, shortly afterward, the paralysis effect wears off and the spider begins to chase him again. He remembers the flying ability and tries to use it, but for some reason, he cannot take flight. With no other choice, he keeps running, rolling along the ground as fast as he can. After several minutes of this desperate escape, his roll skill reaches level 3. Up ahead, he spots a cliff and decides to risk everything to cross it. Even without being able to fly, his wings allow him to glide a little, managing to reach the other side. However, there is no time to celebrate, as the spider creates a bridge using its web and soon resumes the pursuit. As he continues to flee, his roll skill levels up once again. Along the way, he ends up defeating several monsters that appear in his path, gaining experience and increasing his level. When he finally reaches level 8, he decides to stop running and face the spider once and for all. He analyzes the creature's stats again and notices a skill called double poison. Immediately afterward, the spider activates this skill, but the protagonist manages to leap away. He notices that the poison causes only a burning sensation in his throat, without causing real damage, thanks to his poison resistance. Observing the spider's behavior, he realizes that the creature is merely waiting for the poison to take effect. At that moment, he comes up with a risky idea. He pretends to be defeated by the poison. The spider, believing it has won, approaches. Taking advantage of this opening, the protagonist uses his breath attack and ends the fight with a powerful tail strike. With that, he jumps directly from level 8 to level 14. He eagerly waits for the appearance of the human transformation skill, but ends up receiving only a new skill related to his tail, since it was with it that he defeated the spider. In the late afternoon, he walks while carrying the body of a gray wolf, thinking that it had been an extremely tiring day. A little further ahead, he finds a cave and decides to turn it into his base. Later, while eating, he remembers some small fruits he found that resemble peppers. He squeezes them over the meat, realizing that the flavor becomes much better with a slightly spicy touch. Satisfied with the result, he decides that later he will collect more of these fruits, dry them, and use them as seasoning. Because of this culinary discovery, he receives the title of Chef Lord. Already lying down, he silently wonders whether it would be possible to become popular among humans because of his food, but soon remembers that his current appearance is quite frightening. In the human village, Myria hears an old man commenting that he saw Daz. The man explains that he was fishing when he spotted Daz on the other side of the river. According to him, Daz walked toward the forest and ended up disappearing among the trees. Upon hearing this, Myria runs off and goes to look for Marielle. She tells her that Daz is still alive, but Marielle refuses to allow Myria to enter the forest again. However, upon noticing the girl's concern, Marielle says that she will ask the guild to investigate the situation. The adventurers will take care of it at the appropriate time. Myria agrees, says that it is fine, and apologizes for having acted irrationally. The next morning, the protagonist is washing his face by the edge of a river when he notices a strange creature. At first glance, it appears to be a slime. He tries to check its stats, but begins to feel a strong headache. His appraisal skill rises to level 4, and even so, he still cannot clearly see the information of that mysterious creature. The moment the creature begins to approach, he chooses to flee without hesitation. After reaching a more distant point, he thinks that even though he had noticed that the attributes of that monster were nothing impressive, he feels a strong premonition that he should not get close to it. With this in mind, he decides to move even farther away and look for something to eat. Sometime later, he finds a pot and believes that it would be perfect for storing food. However, as he gets closer, he discovers that the object was, in fact, a type of turtle monster of D- rank. Without wasting time, he immediately attacks using the Dragon Punch, but realizes that the creature's HP decreases by only 1 point. Next, he unleashes a series of consecutive blows. However, at the end of the attack, the turtle activates a skill that completely restores its HP. Noticing that none of his efforts are having any effect, he reflects to himself and comes up with a rather cruel idea. Leading the monster to the edge of a cliff, he throws it down. By doing so, he defeats the creature and receives 36 experience points, advancing from level 14 to level 15. However, as a consequence of this unconventional victory, he ends up acquiring the title of Trickster King. Soon after, when he looks back, he notices the presence of several other monstrous turtles. In his thoughts, he concludes that the monster thrown off the cliff probably used some skill to call its allies before being defeated. The creatures begin to stack on top of one another, which leaves him quite frightened. Even so, in the end, they merely remain stacked, without attacking directly. Taking advantage of the situation, the protagonist jumps, grabs the last monster in the pile, and throws it against the others. This move results in the acquisition of the skill called Meteorite. With the defeat of all those monsters, he obtains 594 experience points. Thanks to the title of Walking Egg, this amount is doubled, allowing him to advance directly from level 15 to level 30. In addition, his ability to view statistics rises to level 5. After the battle, he collects the shell that remained in the best condition and decides to take it with him. As he continues walking, he reflects on the fact that he still has not learned the human transformation skill, even though he is already at level 30. In his thoughts, he remembers that only 10 levels remain to reach his next evolution. Suddenly, he hears the sound of footsteps approaching. When he checks the source of the noise, he spots a bear-like monster that he had never seen before. He tries to observe the creature's statistics, but the divine voice informs him that the distance is too great to display the status window. Instead, only details about the species are shown. The creature is identified as a clay bear, a D+ ranked monster, since it is a bear made of clay and has the same rank classification as his own. The protagonist decides to face it. In his thoughts, he considers that he could use the creature's body to produce clay utensils. Thus, he approaches silently, chooses a strategic point, and launches his attack. To his surprise, the monster reacts by opening an enormous mouth, trying to swallow him in a single gulp, which forces him to retreat immediately. Realizing that the clay bear is not very fast, the protagonist decides to attack it using his rolling skill. He strikes the creature's back, dealing considerable damage. Even so, the bear activates an HP regeneration skill. Still, the protagonist continues attacking from behind while thinking of an efficient way to defeat it. At that moment, the creature uses a sandstorm skill, altering its body into a more resistant and defensive form. The protagonist believes he will not be able to deal damage while the monster remains that way, but soon realizes that the clay bear's MP is nearly depleted. Before he can better devise a plan, the monster begins to launch the stalactites that emerge from its own back. The protagonist manages to dodge and realizes that when parts of the clay bear's body separate, they become more malleable. Taking advantage of this weakness, he quickly approaches, rips off one of the creature's arms, and molds that piece of clay into a large sphere. Then, he charges forward with all his strength, as if he were a true meteorite. In this way, he finally defeats the clay bear, receiving 300 experience points. With that, he advances from level 30 to level 33 and acquires the skill called Nutcracker. Back at his base, the protagonist spends some time shaping clay utensils and places them in the oven to bake. While waiting for everything to be ready, he decides to make use of the time and go out in search of food. Now that his ability to view statistics has reached level 5, he can identify much more information about monsters, herbs, and fruits. Because of this, he carefully selects what can and cannot be consumed in that forest, even managing to find a carnivorous flower that accumulates salt in its stem. Meanwhile, Myria decides to enter the forest, even disobeying Marielle's orders. In her thoughts, she believes that if Daz is still alive, she needs to help him return to the village. The feeling of guilt weighs heavily on her heart, as she believes that if she had stopped Daz from pursuing the stone dragon, none of that would have happened. Moving a little deeper into the forest, Myria comes across a shadowy worm. Even so, she manages to defeat the creature without great difficulty. In another part of the forest, the protagonist continues collecting mushrooms and fruits, already thinking about the meal he will prepare later. Myria, in turn, reaches a deeper region of the forest and realizes that going any further would be extremely dangerous. Faced with this, she decides to simply observe the surroundings of the village and then return home. Some time later, the protagonist feels quite satisfied when he finds a luminous mushroom, which can be used as a kind of lantern. At that moment, his clay containers are already ready. Without wasting time, he decides to cook, preparing a tasty stew made with meat and vegetables. As soon as he finishes the meal, his cooking skill rises to level 2. In his thoughts, he plans that next time he will produce some spoons and also coat the walls of his cave with bricks. Because of this idea, he ends up acquiring the ceramic craftsman skill. The next morning, 2 adventurers are sent by the guild with the mission of investigating the forest of Noah. Returning to the protagonist, he appears removing the meat and skin from some gray wolves. While seasoning the meat, he comments to himself that he is beginning to get used to life in that world. The scene then shifts to a group of monkeys that are eating dried meat. The protagonist appears filled with rage, as he recognizes that it was he who had placed that meat out to dry. Determined to do something to drive the animals away, he decides to act. In his thoughts, he decides to gather some poisonous herbs, prepare a mixture, and place it on the dried meat for the monkeys to consume. After some time, he learns to differentiate which wild plants are poisonous and which are not. Upon arriving at a field full of flowers, he intends to collect some toxic species, but ends up encountering a monster he had not seen before. It is a Venon Princess Lacerda, a D- rank monster whose abilities are entirely focused on the use of poison. The Venon Princess begins to run, giving the impression that she is fleeing. However, she takes advantage of a moment of carelessness from the protagonist and attacks him by surprise, delivering a venomous bite. Even though he possesses the poison resistance skill, the protagonist ends up collapsing in that flower-filled field. From a distance, the Venon Princess calmly watches, waiting as her poison takes effect. Upon checking his own status, the protagonist realizes that he has been afflicted by an unusual type of poison. His ability to view statistics is still at a low level and, being only level 3, it cannot provide details about that specific toxin. Faced with this, he decides to seek information about the creature responsible and discovers data about the Venon Princess. She is a monster classified as D-, known for acting with caution and intelligence. She poisons her prey and then immediately withdraws, remaining nearby only to observe, waiting for the poison to take full effect before returning to feed on the remains left behind. The Venon Princess produces an extremely powerful poison within her own body, the result of constantly ingesting highly toxic substances. Curiously, her bodily fluids function as an antidote to the very poison she creates. Because of this, when she ends up being captured, the creature often uses this antidote as a bargaining chip to preserve her own life. In this way, the protagonist understands that his only chance of survival is to capture the Venon Princess. The big problem is that he has no idea where she might be hiding. With no other option, he begins to run through the forest, betting that the creature will follow him. After all, she had already poisoned him and was probably just waiting for his death. This strategy ends up working. He manages to sense her presence and begins to chase her using his rolling ability. However, the Venon princess also possesses the same ability, which makes the pursuit more difficult. Even so, the protagonist remains calm, as he remembers a cliff just ahead, the same one he had passed while fleeing from the spider earlier. He plans to corner the creature there. During the chase, his rolling ability evolves and reaches a higher level. Just as he is about to catch her, he is surprised by the Venon princess, who uses the clay pistol ability to attack him from a distance. Even so, he does not give up and continues advancing, while she keeps firing clay in his direction. Little by little, the two draw closer to the cliff, and the protagonist seizes the moment to collide directly with her. The impact, however, causes the Venon princess to be thrown off the cliff, falling toward the river flowing below. Without thinking twice, the protagonist jumps after her. At that moment, the effect of the poison intensifies, his vision begins to fail, and everything around him seems to lose focus. Even so, he gathers his strength and manages to reach her in midair. Using his dragon flames, he creates enough momentum to launch both of them back to the top of the cliff. After accomplishing this, exhaustion and the poison take their toll, and he ends up losing consciousness. The scene shifts to Miria, who is returning home while complaining that she still has not managed to find Mr. Daz. Suddenly, she hears Marielle calling out to her. Without hesitation, the girl runs to the elf. Marielle asks what Miria was doing in that place, and she replies with an excuse, saying that she was just walking around to pass the time, and assuring that she had not entered the forest. Marielle accepts the explanation and informs her that she received a message from the guild stating that they are already on their way. The scene then returns to the protagonist, who awakens still disoriented. Upon opening his eyes, he is startled to see the Venon princess right in front of him. At first, he believes that the creature is simply waiting for the poison to finish taking effect. However, he soon realizes that his arm no longer hurts. Surprised, he concludes that the Venom princess gave him the antidote while he was unconscious. Unsure of how to react, he picks her up in his arms and ends up finding her appearance curiously adorable. Later, already at his base, the protagonist finishes preparing the meal and sets aside a portion for the Venom princess as well. After eating, the small creature climbs onto his shoulder and begins to stroke him, clearly showing her satisfaction. The protagonist is cheered by this, realizing that she has become his first friend. The Venon then notices a jar containing poison that he had produced earlier and begins to consume it without hesitation. This worries him for a moment, until he remembers that she needs to ingest poisonous substances in order to create even stronger toxins. Driven by curiosity, he decides to try a little of that poison, but the taste is so bad that he almost regrets it immediately. Even so, this action causes his poison resistance ability to increase by another level. He cannot help but wonder how the Venom manages to eat that as if it were a delicious meal. The next day, the two begin working together to defeat a pack of gray wolves. To the protagonist's surprise, they form an extremely efficient duo. Thus, they spend the day cooperating in combat and collecting food. At night, while the Venom princess sleeps peacefully, the protagonist quietly comments that it is good to have a friend he can rely on. Her presence by his side is already beginning to feel natural, as if she had always been part of his routine. The following morning, the protagonist heads out once again accompanied by the Venom. But this time the objective is different. He begins collecting fruits that can be used as seasoning in his meals. The Venom shows no interest in the spicy-tasting fruit and instead moves toward a clearly poisonous mushroom. Upon analyzing its characteristics, the divine voice informs him that it is a cadaveric candidi, a giant mushroom that releases a smell similar to that of a decomposing body. Its poison is extremely strong, but the odor is so repulsive that almost no animal even tries to approach it, much less consume it. When he realizes that the Venom truly intends to eat that mushroom, the protagonist acts quickly. He grabs her in his arms and incinerates that grotesque, nauseating smelling creature using his flames. The Venom reacts with clear dissatisfaction, showing irritation at the loss of what she considered a valuable meal. Shortly afterward, she activates her clay pistol, but not out of anger. In fact, she had detected the presence of an enemy hidden among the nearby bushes. The protagonist immediately feels a strange, oppressive pressure coming from that direction. Upon checking the creature's status, he realizes that it is a powerful enemy, possessing the abilities of gravity, graviton, HP recovery, and also an ability focused on constant pursuit. Faced with this, he understands that fleeing would not be a simple option. He exchanges a look with Venon and, without the need for words, both reach the same conclusion. It would be necessary to fight. The Venon moves first, rolling quickly to hide and position herself better. Meanwhile, the protagonist charges directly to the front line, drawing the enemy's attention and trying to create an opening for the Venon to attack by surprise. However, the situation becomes complicated and he is forced to retreat. One of the monster's heads, resembling that of a dog, activates the gravity ability, pinning the protagonist in place and preventing any movement. Taking advantage of the opening, the enemy advances to attack him. Before the blow could be completed, Venon fires her clay pistol, hitting the enemy and breaking the gravity effect. Free once again, the protagonist reacts immediately, launching his dragon flames at the creature. Even so, the attack does not cause the expected damage, as the enemy activates its HP recovery ability and quickly regenerates its wounds. Observing carefully, the protagonist notices a pattern. He concludes that the face with a sad expression is responsible for using magic, while the irritated face seems focused on physical attacks. Shortly afterward, the sad face begins to conjure a different spell, and the protagonist notices that this energy seems even more dangerous than the gravity used before. Without thinking twice, he advances to stop the spell. He allows the enemy to bite his shoulder just to get close enough to deliver a powerful dragon punch directly to the sad face. At that moment, Venon takes advantage of the opening and acts stealthily, biting the sad face and injecting her venom. The creature tries to use HP recovery again, but the ability does not work as expected. Faced with this, the irritated face makes an extreme decision and eliminates its own sad face in a desperate attempt to prevent the venom from spreading any further. The protagonist checks the enemy's status again, trying to confirm whether it has lost the ability to use magic. However, he realizes that the creature has activated a sacrifice ability. The head that had been torn off begins to move on its own and starts chasing Venon. The protagonist tries to help her, but the irritated face stops him, blocking his path. He understands that he needs to finish this as quickly as possible, because Venon is in serious danger. Gathering all his strength, the protagonist launches his final attack and defeats the monster using his Nutcracker ability. As a result, his ability evolves and reaches a higher level. Without wasting time, he runs in search of Venon, hoping that she is safe. Even though they had known each other for only a short time, they had already been through many situations together. To him, Venon was the only friend he had in that world. In his thoughts, he addresses God, saying that he did not need the human transformation ability as long as Venon was safe. Further ahead, he finds bloodstains on the ground, which makes his heart tighten as he imagines the worst. However, relief quickly comes when he sees her emerge from the bushes, wounded but alive. At that moment, the sad head suddenly reappears, but the protagonist attacks it without hesitation, striking it with fury using his claws until the threat is completely eliminated. Then, he picks Venon up in his arms, showing how happy he was that she was still alive. The divine voice then informs him that he has received 468 experience points, advancing several levels at once, and, as a result, unlocking the human transformation ability. The scene shifts once again to Miria and Marielle. The girl shows anxiety as she imagines what the adventurers who are about to arrive will be like. Marielle hands her a book about monsters. When she opens it, Miria realizes that the content is written in an unknown language. Marielle explains that it is an ancient text that describes monster classification. A shadowy worm is considered rank F, something even Miria would be able to defeat. Rank D monsters, on the other hand, are far more dangerous and require well-trained adventurers to face them. As for rank B monsters, only heroes or saints could even think about defeating them. Shortly after this explanation, the adventurers finally arrive at Marielle's house, marking the beginning of a new encounter. The adventurers take their seats at the table. The young blonde-haired girl is named Melcia, while the girl with dog ears goes by the name Yuno. Marielle then asks Myria to step away for a moment. The elf carefully explains that she does not want Myria to know the details of that specific mission. The true objective is to search for Dawes, with no certainty as to whether he is still alive or already dead. In the past, Myria had formed a group with Dawes to face a stone dragon, and, since then, has carried an enormous weight in her heart, believing herself to be responsible for his death. The elf suspects that Myria has been going alone into the forest in an attempt to find him, something extremely risky and far too dangerous to be ignored. After settling all the details, the adventurers leave the place to begin the investigation. At the same time, elsewhere in the forest, the protagonist spreads medicinal herbs over Venon's body, intending to speed up her recovery process. As soon as he finishes, he moves a little away from the cave to test the human transformation skill. The fear that Venon might find his new appearance strange and end up attacking never left his mind. He becomes thoughtful as he remembers that he received this ability at the exact moment when he almost decided to give up on her. Now, already accustomed to living alongside Venon, he realizes that, despite his desire to live in a human village, he does not want to abandon her. Even so, the idea of gaining the trust of humans seemed far too tempting. Thinking about it, he considers dividing his time, spending a few days with Venon and others in the human village. His excitement grows as he imagines whether he would end up transforming into a handsome boy or an attractive girl. With this curiosity, he decides to activate the skill. His body begins to slowly take shape, bones and skin changing little by little, until the transformation finally comes to an end. To his misfortune, the result reveals a strange creature, a kind of lizard man with a bizarre and extremely ugly appearance. In addition, in this form, MP consumption proves to be very fast, while his attack and defense attributes drop drastically, being reduced by half. Without hesitation, he cancels the skill and returns to his original form. The scene then returns to the adventurers, who had just finished defeating a spider. Later, with night already well advanced, they come across the cave where the protagonist lives. The statues positioned at the entrance draw attention and cause unease. Yuno senses a different smell in the air and finds dried meats hanging from a tree, guided solely by her sense of smell. Faced with this, Melcia decides to check the inside of the cave. Inside, she finds everything very curious and different from what she expected. Yuno, in turn, recognizes the aroma of the red fruits used as seasoning, identifying them as red gold, an extremely rare spice. Melcia had never seen anything like that in person. Yuno comments that she intends to take some, but Melcia stops her, warning that the cave likely belongs to thieves and that they run the risk of being captured. At that moment, Venon growls in the direction of the two, but unexpectedly ends up retreating shortly afterward. Considering the place far too dangerous, Melcia decides that the best course of action is to move away. Outside, the protagonist does not know how to act. He finds himself smiling, imagining that the adventurers must have been impressed by his cave. Taken by this thought, he decides to use human transformation once again to try to approach them. However, the effect is completely opposite of what he expected. As soon as they see him, the adventurers begin attacking without hesitation. The transformation dissipates amid the assault, and Melcia immediately recognizes the creature before her as a young plague dragon. Without wasting time, she tells Yuno to run away. The two run until they reach a safe location. After this discovery, Melcia decides that it will be necessary to call the other members of the group to continue the investigation. The next morning, the protagonist takes a piece of dried meat and, while eating, remembers something important. He approaches Venon and asks if she would be able to produce a very potent poison, but without smell and without color. The intention is to put a bit of this poison on the dried meat to teach a lesson to the monkeys that keep stealing his food. Venon complies with the request without questioning it. As soon as the poison is ready, he prepares the trap and begins waiting beside it. After some time, the monkeys appear, and one of them ends up ingesting the poisoned meat. At that very moment, the protagonist rushes forward to attack. The monkeys quickly organize themselves into formation to face him as a group, but Venon, who is hidden, provides support, making the victory relatively easy. However, the monkeys activate a skill to call for reinforcements, attracting the clan leader, a powerful orangutan. The protagonist analyzes the creature's status and realizes that they are very similar to his own, with the difference being that the enemy possesses a skill capable of strengthening all allies. Faced with this, he understands that he needs to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. He uses his dragon breath, but the smaller monkeys unite and create a combined barrier to block the attack. Soon after, the monkeys launch their attack. The protagonist notices that they are much faster than before. Even fighting alongside Venom, it becomes clear that the battle will not be simple. While thinking of a solution, he asks the divine voice for more information about that creature. The answer comes, explaining that the orangutan is an evolved form, someone who defeated the former alpha in combat to become the clan leader. For orangutans, evolving through battle is something sacred. In addition, they master various support magics aimed at helping the group. Upon hearing this, the protagonist remembers having seen the telepathic communication skill in the orangutan's list of abilities. Taking advantage of this memory, he grabs the monkey that had been poisoned and tries to negotiate with the leader. He proposes that they leave the area in exchange for Venom curing the poisoned one. The orangutan, however, refuses the proposal. In his view, the protagonist and Venom have already proven to be far too great a threat to be ignored. He concludes that the best course of action is to eliminate them right there, while he still has the chance, regardless of the sacrifices required. With no other alternative, the protagonist decides to challenge him to a duel, knowing that, for orangutans, this type of combat is a sacred custom. The challenge is accepted. Venom then removes the poison from the injured monkey and, shortly after, is restrained by one of the other monkeys, preventing her from intervening in the fight. The two stand face to face. The orangutan initiates the attack, and the protagonist can only defend himself in the opening moments. Next, he uses his rolling skill and begins to move away. However, he realizes that if he keeps retreating, Venom might end up being attacked. Suddenly, he stops, turns around, and counterattacks with a heavy tail strike, followed by a sequence of rapid attacks. He is surprised to notice that this combination was far more effective than he had imagined. Moving in to finish it, the protagonist prepares for the final blow. But the orangutan activates a special ability that converts all of his MP into agility. With the absurd increase in speed, facing the orangutan becomes extremely difficult. Even so, the protagonist decides to face him head-on. He lets out a powerful roar to draw the enemy's attention and, using telepathic communication, provokes him, questioning whether the leader might be afraid to fight directly. The provocation works. The orangutan charges without hesitation, and the two begin exchanging intense blows. Venom watches everything with apprehension, worried as she sees her friend fighting in that manner. After a long confrontation, both are severely wounded. They advance once more, and the protagonist lands a direct blow to the orangutan's face. Convinced that he has won, he lowers his guard. At that moment, he receives a violent blow to the chin and falls nearly unconscious. It is then that the system informs him that he gained 324 experience points, leveled up from level 37 to level 39, and acquired the title of Clan Chief. Later, he awakens still confused and takes a few moments to realize that he is once again inside his own cave. Little by little, his memory returns, and he recalls the battle against the orangutan. Upon opening the status window, he notices that his level has increased, which confirms that he emerged victorious from the confrontation. Soon after, a doubt arises about how Venom managed to bring him back there. When he mentions this, Venom changes her expression, becomes serious, and looks away, pointing to the orangutans around them. That leaves him completely confused, since, in his mind, they could only be there to avenge the former leader. At that moment, he remembers the title he had received before losing consciousness. Upon checking the status more carefully, he realizes that he now possesses the title of Clan Chief. Faced with this, the protagonist decides to view the situation positively, thinking that he can now rely on the orangutans to help with heavier tasks. The next morning, the protagonist is surprised to see that the orangutans had brought a large pile of fruits. Venom, on the other hand, shows no enthusiasm about it. The orangutans then indicate that they want to eat dried meat, and the protagonist agrees. Since there was no need to go hunting that day, he decides to take advantage of the time to renew his stock of dried meat. While he was seasoning the meat, one of the orangutans watches with curiosity, and the protagonist decides to show the entire preparation process. After explaining each step, he asks the orangutan to try doing it alone. Venom continues to show dissatisfaction, and the protagonist realizes that something is wrong with her, although he cannot understand exactly why. Reflecting on the situation, the protagonist thinks that now that he has several new companions sharing the cave, it will be necessary to store even more food. With that in mind, he decides to make more pots. While he molds the clay, another orangutan watches attentively and shows a desire to try. Upon closer inspection, the protagonist realizes that the task is easier for the orangutan, since he has fingers instead of claws. Faced with that, he explains the entire process once again, and then lets the orangutan do it alone. With someone taking care of the ceramics, the protagonist begins to think about the next step, until he notices Venom trying to make ceramics as well. He asks what she is trying to do and comments that, with those small paws, she would not be able to produce anything useful. Upon hearing this, Venom runs off, crying because of the comment. Later, the protagonist hands some tools to the other orangutans and shows how they should be used. He explains that they will be responsible for expanding the cave. During all of this, Venom watches from afar, visibly saddened by the situation. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the adventurers are sitting in a tavern, eating and talking. They comment that they are still waiting for the arrival of the other group members so they can continue the mission. The next day, Venom wakes the protagonist in an agitated manner. He does not understand the reason, but when he tries to get up, he realizes that the orangutan spent the night sleeping pressed against him. Without giving much importance to that, he simply lies down again and goes back to sleep. Shortly after, strange sounds draw his attention, and he wakes up to check. At that moment, he notices that one of the orangutans is poisoned. Upon analyzing the situation, he realizes that it is Venom's poison. The small creature is beside him, laughing and making a gesture of approval. Even so, the protagonist asks her to remove the poison immediately. After that, Venom shows that she is irritated about something, but the protagonist cannot understand the reason. She goes over to the pots and tries to explain herself. After reflecting, the protagonist concludes that Venom is upset because she did not receive attention. Then, he invites her to go hunting, as they used to do before, which immediately cheers Venom up. On the other side of the story, Myria finds herself restless. Several days have already passed since the adventurers entered the forest, and none of them have returned. The concern grows with each moment, until she decides not to wait any longer and resolves to go after Mr. Dawes on her own. At the same time, the protagonist and Venom move through the forest. He comments that he feels very close to evolving again, but soon realizes that Venom does not seem well. She looks dejected, and the reason becomes clear. The orangutans came along this time as well. Venom wanted to be alone with the protagonist, with no one else around. Annoyed, she moves ahead along the path, staying alert to her surroundings. It does not take long for her to notice two gray wolves hidden among the bushes. The protagonist suggests that they attack together, as they used to do before. However, before that can happen, the orangutans move first and charge at the gray wolves. For the protagonist, that is not really a problem, but Venom clearly feels displeased. Irritated, she changes direction and starts walking off alone, while the protagonist runs after her. The scene then shifts to Myria, who realizes that she has gone too deep into the forest. When she thinks about retreating, her eyes end up spotting Mr. Dawes in the distance. He begins to move away, and she decides to follow him. Without realizing it, Myria is being watched by some hidden creature. A little further ahead, several presences begin to emerge from the darkness surrounding the path. Back with the protagonist, he apologizes to Venom for having given so much attention to the orangutans and promises that, next time, they will hunt alone. Venom's reaction changes immediately, becoming visibly excited. The protagonist also makes it clear that, at that moment, she is the most important thing in his life. However, this atmosphere is interrupted when he hears a distant scream. By the voice, he recognizes that it is Myria. Regardless of what might be happening, he understands that he needs to reach her as quickly as possible to help her. When he looks at Venom, he feels hesitant about taking her along. since there is a chance that Myria may be accompanied by other humans. He remembers what happened last time and decides to act cautiously. Thus, he asks Venon to stay where she is and shoots off at high speed using his rolling ability. Even so, Venon does not obey and goes after him. The protagonist increases his speed even more in an attempt to shake her off. But Venon accelerates as well. In the middle of the way, she ends up crashing into a rock. He stops immediately and goes back to check if she is all right. When he realizes that there are no serious injuries, he turns to move on and help Myria. Venon tries to stop him, but he apologizes, emphasizing how important she is to him, and says that, even so, he needs to help Myria before anything else. Meanwhile, Myria finds herself surrounded by wolves with a strange appearance. The protagonist arrives at the exact moment when she is about to be attacked. The divine voice informs that those creatures are called Mahalobo, monsters of D- classification. They possess a third eye capable of sharing visual information with other nearby members of the pack, functioning in a way similar to the Rinnegan. The protagonist asks the divine voice to display the creature's statistics, but receives the response that some information cannot be shown while he is only at level 5. He remembers that something similar had already happened before when he analyzed the slime near the lake. The wolves advance to attack, and the protagonist reacts by using his dragon breath, eliminating one of them. The other two are taken down with direct punches from his fists. After the fight, he tries to approach Myria, but the girl becomes frightened and asks him not to come any closer. The protagonist feels a tightness in his chest, even though he had already expected that reaction, knowing that she would not recognize him. He tries to explain himself, but at that exact moment, the divine voice announces that he gained 64 experience points and advanced to level 40. Observing closely the way he moves, Myria begins to imagine that he might be the small yellow dragon she had seen before. Carefully, she stands up and starts to imitate the movements he made that first time. The protagonist reacts by repeating exactly the same gesture, confirming her suspicion. However, before they can say anything, new Mahalobo appear around them. Without hesitating, he places Myria on his back and starts running, determined to protect her. And thus we conclude the 7th episode of the anime, Reincarnated as a Dragon Hatchling. If you want the continuation of the next episodes, leave it there in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep catching the upcoming videos. See you next time.